civil service system, and that has served us very well. But it's time now, I think, to move to another iteration of that system, an iteration that moves us beyond kind of the stratification and stasis that can result from too many rules and too much of a process which focuses on what's in the collective bargaining agreement, what's in the rules. We need to move to a system which encourages entrepreneurship and innovation and risk-taking, and in a short, encourages people to be the best that they can be in that organization. And instead, where we find ourselves is in a system where, by and large, people get paid and promoted based strictly on seniority. So, for example, 30 to 40% of state employees in the new biennium that we're now in will receive an automatic 5% pay hike simply because they've worked in state government for another year. That's the salary schedule. And while I understand that at one level, on the other hand, it's hard for taxpayers and voters to understand that, because few of them work in an environment where they get an automatic pay hike plus a COLA if one happens to be available that year, simply because they've been there another year. Out in the world, in the private sector and in the nonprofit sector, and as you heard, I, like many of you, have been very involved in the nonprofit sector. In both those places, we tie compensation and retention to performance. And this was recognized as being the direction we should go in the Civil Service Reform Act of 2004. That was the major legislation that was passed by the legislature, signed by Governor Locke, which did three things. Number one, it gave state workers the right to collectively bargain salaries and benefits. Number two, it instituted the concept of competitive contracting. Now, we would figure out what state government's core competencies are by exposing a wider array of state services to competition, to figure out what the state employees would win if they competed to provide that service, as opposed to what small businesses, or big businesses for that matter, could do if they were given a chance to provide various kinds of state services. And the third component of that law was something called performance management. Performance management embodies the ideal of rigorously evaluating everyone in an organization, setting goals with them, and then starting to tie their pay and their promotion to performance, not merely to seniority. And in fact, what it does in law is it allows every agency director to set aside some of their salary budget, and instead of simply providing it to everybody in a sort of another thin layer of peanut butter or spread across everybody, another fraction of a percent pay hike, instead you get to set that aside and give it to people on a performance basis, based on this performance evaluation system, which the Department of Personnel has to approve ahead of time and actively monitors, and based on your demonstrated ability to evaluate people and then to distinguish among three groups of people. And this will all sound very familiar to those of you who have been out of the private sector or the nonprofit world, because what it has us do is to figure out who our very top performers are, people who are eligible for what's called an excellence award, who our solid performers are, I mean people who are hitting their marks, and people who aren't getting it done. It's basically those three groups that you end up sorting everybody into. And typically, in the average organization, only 5 to 8% will be in that bottom category, and about 5 to 8% will be in the top category, and everyone else will be grouped in the middle, along with a few people who haven't been with the agency long enough to be eligible, because you have to be in the office at least 12 months. I'm a real believer in this system. We were the first agency to adopt it. I mean, we were working on it before we could even officially implement it. We were designing it. We were pushing Department of Personnel to help us get going on it. We were helping them flesh it out because they hadn't worked out all the details. And we instituted it as soon as we could in 2006. And I have to tell you, it really works. Number one, because it allows me to really know in detail a lot about everybody I'm working with. When I arrived, I found a very uneven evaluation system. Some people were being evaluated thoroughly, and some people weren't. Some people were receiving regular performance evaluations, and others were not. And I had a very difficult time telling, distinguishing among my very best performers, my solid performers, and the people who weren't cutting it. I remember that there was one manager who I demoted, who subsequently left the office, and afterwards people came up to me and said, "Boy, I'm sure glad you made that decision. That was a long time coming. We wonder why that hadn't happened before." And I looked at someone who said that to me and I said, "Well, I read this person's performance evaluations. She looked really good on paper. And it wasn't until I'd been in the office about a year and a half that I realized that she just wasn't cutting it." That was a weakness in the performance evaluation system. The fact is, managers don't like criticizing people they work with, right? It's tough to elicit honest constructive criticism from managers about the people they work with side by side. And so one of the reasons that this is valuable is it really helps you figure out who's not pulling their weight. And that's important in any organization, because one of the most demoralizing things that can happen in any organization, any workplace, is to have a handful of people not really getting the job and sort of barely getting by, and everyone else around them working harder and looking at those people saying, well, why are we working so hard? They're getting paid the same as we are, and yet they're not really working that hard. So one of the best things you can do for morale is to help the group that isn't performing well to get better, to work harder and more effectively, and for those who ultimately don't do that, to help them find another career, because it raises the morale of everybody. But the more important reason to have a performance management system and a performance culture is that everybody responds positively to being recognized and rewarded for their excellent performance. Everybody does. So my motto is very simple. Reward the best, inspire the rest. You know, identify the top 5 to 7% in the office who are having an absolutely exceptional year. Give them an additional reward. And back before the budget crisis, that would be about $3,000 and up to 3 days of paid vacation. And that's pretty good money if you're a legal assistant, a paralegal, or even an attorney. Or if you were a solid performer, you could be eligible for a performance award of $500 and 3 days of paid vacation. Again, I got no extra money for this. This is all from inside my salary budget, mostly achieved through salary savings, and not a lot of money in a $229 million biennium budget. It was about $900,000 a year when we were able to do it. But I tell you what, when you recognize people, it really lifts them up. Everyone likes to be recognized. And we still do this, even though we're not allowed to do this with money anymore, because the legislature in its wisdom thought they saw a savings, which is false, but they thought they saw a savings there, and banned any agency from actually providing more. We can't even give pen sets out, which is a classic example of micromanagement. But nevertheless, we still provide the recognition to people in the office because we want them to know that we see them as exceptional and as solid. The other thing we do in our office, which is important, is that we regularly solicit the input of everybody in the office for ways to improve the operation of the office. We, every 18 months, have a series of town hall meetings in the office we call speak-ups. We call them that because we want everyone to come to the meeting and to speak up. We've done this 4 times. We just finished our 4th round. In the 4th round, we adopted principles of lean manufacturing, what the Japanese call Kaizen, which is essentially continuous quality improvement. And I thought, we've done this 3 times before, and people might come to these meetings and be out of ideas. No. They gave us 463 ideas for streamlining our procedures and our production, reducing waste, increasing quality. 52 pages worth. And why did that happen? It happened because from the very beginning, in early 2005, when I solicited the best thinking of people in our office and we implemented those ideas, people saw that if they brought their best ideas forward, they would be taken seriously and wherever possible would be implemented. And you know what happens when someone, say a legal assistant in the L&I division, comes out with a proposal and then she sees it implemented? It makes her feel really good and valued. It really makes her feel like, to know that she is a team member who is valuable and valued part of the organization. And the next time you do one of the town hall meetings, one of the speak-ups, she's got more ideas for you. I'll never forget, I think it was the 3rd round of this process a couple of years ago when a legal assistant in our office named Becky Waldron stood up. Becky was in our Solicitor General's division. She got up and she said in front of 200 of her colleagues and her bosses, "I know how we can save money on manila folders." And what impressed me about that was, number one, she really did know how we could save money on manila folders because we spend a lot of money on office supplies and she handled a lot of them every day and she'd been thinking about this. But secondly, and even more importantly, what impressed me was that she felt safe enough and confident enough to get up in front of her colleagues and her bosses to share her best thinking about a way for the office to save money. She knew we would take her ideas seriously. In fact, she was so confident of it that for months afterwards, she would occasionally stop by my office, poke her head and say, "Hey, how's that folder project coming?" I knew we'd arrived when Becky got up and shared her idea with us because she knew that we appreciated her and valued her insight and her expertise. That's important too. It's all part and parcel of the performance culture concept. So what are the results of all this? The results are the bottom line. The bottom line is that in June of this year, we had fewer people drawing a paycheck in our office than we did in June of 2005 when I was in my first year. And yet, year after year, the legislature gives us more responsibilities, more duties to execute. We have more work. We're doing it with fewer people. Now, importantly in that picture is that not only has quality not suffered, but quality has improved. And we measure that, for example, by looking at a number of metrics and looking at client satisfaction. We measure client satisfaction every 18 months. And every 18 months since I've been Attorney General, our client satisfaction scores have gone up. And every year or so, the Department of Personnel, every couple of years, the Department of Personnel measures employee satisfaction in our agency. And every year they've measured it that I've been here, our employee